Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we're diving into, well, I guess you could say we're doing a deep dive into Enphase Energy.
Enphase Energy.
They're the solar energy giant, and we want to try to figure out if their stock is something that you should buy or if it's a bust. To do that, we've got a whole bunch of analyst reports, earning call transcripts. We've even got some legal news here, all to try to get us a clear picture of what's going on with this company.
Yeah, and
The reports themselves.
the reports themselves are interesting
Yeah.
because some of them are super bullish on Enphase and others are kind of like sounding the alarm.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag in here. That's why we're here to try to break it all down so you can make your own informed decision.
And what's really cool here, what's really interesting is Enphase is more than just solar panels. They're actually pushing into some other really exciting areas like EV charging and portable power systems. It's like they're building this whole ecosystem of clean energy solutions.
Okay, so big picture, it sounds like they're making moves, but let's get down to like the nitty-gritty. Enphase just finished Q4 of 2024, and on the surface, things look pretty good, right? I mean, revenue was a solid $382.7 million, which actually exceeded expectations, and earnings per share were a healthy 94 cents. So that sounds like a win to me.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, those numbers are impressive, but we have to remember we're not just looking at one quarter, we're looking at the long game here when we try to decide if a stock is a buy or not. And one thing that kind of concerns me is that their European revenue dropped 25%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That is a lot.
that's a significant chunk of change, and it really raises some questions for me about how sustainable their growth is going to be going forward.
Yeah, I see your point. It does feel a little premature to be celebrating one good quarter when you have a major market like Europe that's slumping. So let's unpack this European issue a little bit. What's behind this decline? And more importantly, what is Enphase doing to try to counter it?
So it seems like there's a couple things going on in Europe. It seems like there is softening demand for solar, and there's also been some recent utility rate cuts in some countries. So when your electricity bill is lower, people are less incentivized to go out and invest in solar.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But Enphase is not just sitting idly by. They are aggressively expanding into Southeast Asia and Latin America. They're trying to diversify their revenue streams and tap into those emerging solar markets. So it's kind of like a strategic pivot to balance out that regional weakness they're seeing in Europe.
That's a smart move. But I also noticed something when I was going through these reports. It seems like a pretty big chunk of their recent success is tied to those IRA tax benefits. What happens if those benefits start to shrink or disappear altogether?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
That's a critical question to consider because those IRA tax benefits totaled almost $52 million in Q4 alone,
Wow.
which gave their gross margin a nice little boost. But here's where things get interesting. If you strip away that IRA benefit, their underlying gross margin was only 39.7%.
Ooh, okay.
Which is significantly lower, and it does make you wonder about their long-term profitability if those government incentives were to go away.
So they're facing some headwinds on the margin front. So what's Enphase's plan to tackle this? How are they going to keep their financial engine running smoothly?
Well, it seems like they're focusing on two main things. The first thing is new product innovation. They just unveiled their IQ9 microinverter, which boasts gallium nitride technology.
Hold on.
It's a mouthful.
Gallium nitride.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Can you break that down a little bit? Why is this new tech such a big deal, and how does it fit into Enphase's overall strategy?
Okay, so gallium nitride is a game changer. In the world of microinverters, it basically allows Enphase to pack more power into a smaller package, while at the same time boosting efficiency. So it's not only making their product perform better, it's potentially also going to reduce their manufacturing costs, which is really crucial in a market that's as competitive as solar.
Yeah, especially since they're going head-to-head with giants like Tesla in the battery market.
Exactly. So they have to stay ahead of the technology curve.
Okay, so they're innovating, they're diversifying, but the competition is heating up, especially with Tesla making waves in the solar industry. So what's your overall assessment of where Enphase fits in? Do they have what it takes to not only survive, but thrive?
So Enphase definitely has some serious strengths. Their microinverter technology is a key differentiator. It offers some real advantages in power production and system monitoring. They've also built a really strong reputation for good customer service.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
You know what?
which
I'm curious. What makes their customer service so exceptional? Is it just that they're really nice on the phone? Or is there something more to it?
it's more than just being friendly. They've actually developed a really robust support system, and they have proactive monitoring tools that help customers get the most out of their Enphase system. So it's about building trust and a long-term relationship. It's not just about making a sale and then forgetting about the customer.
And it sounds like that approach is paying off.
Yeah, and it's paying off big time. They actually boast a 78% net promoter score,
Wow.
which is amazing. It's practically unheard of in the energy sector.
78%. That's really powerful. It really shows that they've got some strong customer loyalty, but let's not sugarcoat things. Despite all these strengths, some analysts have been downgrading Enphase recently if things are so rosy. What's driving this negativity?
Well, not everyone is convinced that Enphase can maintain its current momentum. Some analysts are worried about them losing market share. In the inverter segment, they see competitors catching up. And they're concerned that Enphase might start to lose ground, particularly if there are price wars or aggressive marketing tactics from their competitors.
Okay, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. What are these analysts suggesting that Enphase needs to do to address these concerns and kind of reassure investors?
The message is pretty clear. They need to innovate. Analysts are urging Enphase to double down on research and development, really push the boundaries of their technology so they can stay ahead of the curve. Because they need to convince investors that they're not just a one-trick pony, that they're a company with a pipeline of innovative solutions that's going to allow them to keep that market leadership for years to come.
I see. They can't just rest on their laurels, especially in such a dynamic market like solar. So is that where these new products come in, like this gallium nitride push?
Absolutely. They have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And this IQ9 microinverter with gallium nitride technology is a perfect example of them doing that. It's smaller, it's more efficient, and it's potentially cheaper to produce, which directly addresses those concerns about whether or not they're going to be able to stay cost competitive.
And they're strategically manufacturing it in the U.S., which is a big deal when you consider all of the supply chain headaches that we've all been experiencing lately.
Exactly. Enphase is trying to mitigate risks by diversifying their supply chain and bringing some manufacturing back home. It's a trend we're seeing across industries, and it makes a lot of sense in today's volatile global landscape.
It really does. Speaking of volatility, let's circle back to that European market slump. Those numbers were pretty alarming. What's the long-term outlook there? Are they just kind of hoping for the best, or do they have a concrete plan to try to turn things around?
So, Enphase knows that the recent utility rate cuts in Europe have put a damper on demand, but they're still optimistic about the long-term growth potential of the European market.
Okay.
Their argument is that the shift toward solar plus storage systems, which combine solar panels with battery storage, is gaining momentum.
So they're betting on this new wave of solar plus storage to revive the European market. It's a risky bet, but I can see the logic there. But what about those concerns surrounding government incentives? How much of Enphase's success hinges on those tax benefits? And what happens if those benefits were to suddenly disappear?
Well, those government incentives definitely play a big role, especially when you look at their growth margins. But Enphase is working on other things to improve their profitability as well.
Okay, so they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. That's a relief. But what about the bigger picture? Where does Enphase fit into this whole renewable energy landscape? Do they have what it takes to be a major player in the long run?
I think they're definitely well positioned. The demand for these distributed energy systems is only going to increase as the world shifts towards cleaner energy sources, and Enphase, with its focus on solar plus storage, is riding that wave.
Plus, they're branching out into things like EV charging and portable power systems. It seems like a really smart move to broaden their market reach and tap into some of those new growth opportunities.
It is. They're not limiting themselves to just solar. They're expanding into these adjacent markets, which is allowing them to tap into new revenue streams and solidify their position as a more comprehensive home energy solutions provider.
They're building a whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've got the tech, they've got the customer loyalty, they've got a solid growth strategy. But what about the financials? Are they a safe bet for investors?
Well, let's crack open their financial reports and see what they reveal.
All right. Numbers time. I always find financial statements a bit daunting, but you always manage to make them understandable.
Don't worry, we'll break it down together. So first off, their cash position is strong. They ended Q4 2024 with $1.72 billion in cash and short-term investments.
Wow.
And they still have $398 million remaining in their share repurchase authorization.
Okay, so they've got plenty of cash on hand. What are they planning to do with it all? Are they going on a shopping spree? Investing in new ventures? Or are they just sitting on it like a dragon hoarding its treasure?
Well, their priority is investing in the business. That includes new product development and expanding their manufacturing capacity. But they have also hinted at potential mergers and acquisitions.
Oh, M&A activity. Always exciting.
It is.
But what about those share repurchases? Does that mean they think their stock is undervalued right now?
It could be a signal, but they've been very clear that share repurchases are secondary to business needs and strategic acquisitions.
Okay.
So it's not a guarantee, but it is something to keep in mind.
Okay, so financially they seem to be in good shape. But what about those risks we were talking about earlier? How serious are those? Are we talking minor bumps in the road or potential deal breakers?
I mean, the competition is definitely heating up. Tesla is a really formidable opponent, and there are other players emerging as well. Enphase needs to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to innovation if they want to maintain their market share.
And those government incentives,
Right.
they're still a bit of a wild card.
Yet any changes to those policies could have a really big impact on Enphase's profitability. It's something investors should watch really closely.
So it sounds like we're back to that big question, to buy or not to buy. Is Enphase a stock worth betting on?
Exactly. And like we've said, it really depends on your individual investment goals and your risk tolerance.
All right, so let's break this down for our listeners. What are the key arguments for investing in Enphase right now? What makes this stock a potential winner?
Okay, so the demand for solar energy is growing really rapidly, and Enphase is a leader in that space. They have great technology, a loyal customer base, and they're expanding into new markets. Plus, they have a really solid financial foundation with lots of cash on hand.
Okay, that sounds pretty compelling. But what about the arguments against investing? What are the potential downsides here? What could go wrong?
Well, the competition is fierce. There's always a chance that Enphase could lose market share. They're also pretty reliant on those government incentives, which could always change, and that European market slump. It's a little concerning, even if they are optimistic about the long-term outlook, and their stock price has been pretty volatile lately.
So there's a lot to consider here. It kind of sounds like a high risk, high reward kind of investment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, but investing is never a sure thing. There are always risks involved. I think the key is to weigh those risks against the potential rewards, and then make a decision that aligns with your investment strategy.
That's some really wise advice. So what's the next step for our listeners who are trying to decide whether or not to invest in Enphase? What should they do to really make an informed decision?
Research, research, research. Don't just take our word for it. Dig deeper. Look at their financial reports. Read what analysts are saying. Follow industry trends. The more informed you are, the better equipped you're going to be to make a sound investment decision.
That's great advice. Speaking of research, I'm curious to see what else our sources reveal about Enphase. There's still so much to unpack.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some more details and see what other insights we can glean.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's dive back in. You mentioned mergers and acquisitions earlier. Was there anything in the reports that hinted at what Enphase might be targeting?
So they're being pretty tight-lipped about specifics, but during their earnings call, they did emphasize that they're interested in companies that align with their vision, which is basically creating a clean energy future. So you can think about things like battery technology, smart home integration, maybe even EV charging infrastructure. It really seems like they're trying to build an ecosystem, not just selling individual products.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like they want to be the Apple of the energy world, just creating a seamless, integrated experience for all their customers. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something else I noticed in these reports. These class action lawsuits against Enphase. What's the deal with those?
Oh, yeah. A little bit of legal drama.
Yeah.
So, several law firms have announced these class action lawsuits. They're alleging that Enphase misled investors about their financial performance and their prospects. Specifically, they say that Enphase downplayed the risks associated with their European market exposure and their reliance on those government incentives.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Those are two of the major concerns we highlighted earlier. So are these lawsuits like legitimate threats, or is it just kind of opportunistic legal maneuvering?
It's hard to say at this point. I mean, class action lawsuits can be really costly and time-consuming, even if the company ultimately wins. They can also damage the company's reputation and create uncertainty for investors.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something to watch closely.
For sure. It sounds like investors need to factor that in, like factor in that legal uncertainty when they're evaluating Enphase. Okay, let's go back to the numbers for a second. We talked about their cash position. But what about their profitability? Did you see any red flags or any bright spots in their financial reports?
So one thing that jumps out at me is how volatile their gross margins are. They hit a high of 53.62% in Q4 2024, but that was mainly because of those IRA tax benefits. If you take those out, the underlying gross margin was a much more modest 39.7%, and their guidance for Q1 2025 suggests that their margins could go even lower.
So fluctuating margins are never really a good sign, are they?
No, not really.
It just makes it hard to predict their future profitability. What's driving this volatility? Is it just the normal ups and downs of the solar market? Or are there some deeper issues at play here?
It's a mix of things. You've got component costs, government incentives, pricing pressures. All those things kind of contribute to the fluctuations we're seeing. It's a reminder that Enphase profitability isn't set in stone. It can be influenced by all these external forces.
Okay, so we've got legal challenges, Fluctuating margins, stiff competition. Started to sound like a pretty risky bet, but I don't want to dwell on the negative. Let's not forget about all the positives. What are the key arguments in favor of investing in Enphase? You know what makes this stock a potential winner.
Well, Enphase is still a leader in a rapidly growing industry. The global shift towards renewable energy is happening, and Enphase is well positioned to benefit from that. They're investing heavily in innovation, as we discussed, and they're expanding into new markets, which should allow them to diversify their revenue and become less dependent on any one region.
Right, they're not just sitting still, they're actively trying to shape their future. But what about their valuation? Is the stock currently overpriced? Or is there still room for growth?
That's a tough one. Unphase's stock has been all over the place recently, up and down, really volatile. Some analysts think it's currently overvalued, others think there's still potential for it to go higher. I think it really comes down to your investment horizon, your risk tolerance, and how you view their long-term growth prospects.
So no easy answer there, it's a judgment call. Based on a whole bunch of factors, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone over their financial performance, the legal challenges they're facing, the competition. It's clear that they're a company of a lot of potential, but also some significant risks.
Yeah, for sure. Like we've been saying, the decision of whether or not to invest ultimately comes down to you, your own individual circumstances, and your investment goals.
Well said. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to get your final thoughts on Enphase. Based on everything we've discussed, are you personally bullish or bearish on this stock?
That is a tough one. I really like their technology. I think it's innovative, and I like that they're expanding into new markets. But I'm also a little hesitant because of the competitive pressures and the fact that they're so reliant on those government incentives.
So you're cautiously optimistic,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
with a healthy dose of realism?
Yeah.
I think a lot of our listeners probably feel the same way. Yeah, it sounds like Enphase is a company that requires some careful consideration, and you really have to do your homework. There's a lot to like, but there are also some real concerns. So, any final words of wisdom for our listeners who are trying to figure all of this out?
I think it's always important to look beyond the hype and really dig into the details. Don't just follow the crowd or chase the latest trends. Really try to understand the company, understand their business model, the competitive landscape, their financial health, and all the risks that they're facing, because knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing.
Couldn't agree more. We've tried to equip our listeners with all the knowledge they need to make an informed decision about Enphase. We've explored their growth, their innovative tech, their expansion into new markets, and all of the challenges they're up against,
Right.
like the competition, the legal issues, and that reliance on government incentives.
It's a really interesting case study. Enphase is at the forefront of this global energy transition, but they're also trying to make it in this really complex and constantly changing market. And their future success really depends on their ability to adapt, innovate, and execute on their plans.
Well said. And for all of you listening out there, if you want to stay up to date on Enphase and all the other amazing companies that are shaping the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that bell icon so you don't miss any of our deep dives.
Yeah, we're here to break it all down for you and help you make smart decisions. Until next time, happy investing.
And don't forget, always do your own research. Before investing in anything,